So moving on to type 2 diabetes, there was a study that looked at all kinds of dietary patterns and diabetes risk, and the authors said in their summary, together with maintenance of ideal body weight, the promotion of a so-called prudent diet characterized by a higher intake of plant-based foods and a lower intake of red meat, meat products, sweets, high-fat dairy, and refined grains, or a Mediterranean dietary pattern appear to be the best strategies for decreasing diabetes risk. So what are the rates among vegetarian or vegan populations? Well, the Adventist Health Study 2 found that in health-conscious meat eaters, semi-vegetarians, pesco-vegetarians, lacto-ovo vegetarians, and vegans, as people consume less meat, their risk for diabetes decreased. And so the rates were about 7.6% among the health-conscious non-vegetarians, 6.1 amongst the semi-vegetarians, 4.8 among pesco-vegetarians, and this is lacto-ovo vegetarians plus fish. About 3.2% among lacto-ovo vegetarians and about 2.9% among vegans. And taking this same cohort and following them for another 2 years, who developed diabetes? Well, the risk was 62% lower for developing diabetes for vegans than for non-vegetarians. It was about 32% lower among lacto-ovo vegetarians. And this was adjusted for everything, for age, gender, education, income, television watching, physical activity, smoking, and body mass index. So they actually adjusted for body weight. So this is very interesting. There was a study looking at diabetes rates in Taiwanese Buddhists, and for similar health-conscious near-vegan, and they looked at rates in similar health-conscious near-vegan and omnivorous volunteers, diabetes risk fully adjusted for all of these variables was 51% lower among near-vegan men and about 75% lower for near-vegan women. And I want to tell you, the pictures on this slide are very interesting because I was speaking at the Tzu-Chi International Medical Association conference in Taiwan, and there are 7 of the most highly regarded hospitals in Taiwan. They are all Buddhist hospitals, and they are all completely vegetarian. This meal at the bottom was your typical cafeteria meal. Whole grain rice, and it's just a whole huge buffet of vegetables and tofu dishes and so forth. I was taken into the kitchen, and you see that the garbage bags in that corner? They're all filled with greens for the patients. Fresh greens from the organic gardens that the Buddhist nuns were growing. Yeah, I mean, unbelievable. Can you imagine this concept of actually feeding sick people healthy food? It's just unbelievable. And we have so much to learn from others around the world. I was stunned when I saw those bags of greens. You would never see that in a hospital here. What about the diabetes rates among East Indians? Well, over 150,000 adults, 20 to 49 years of age, comparing non-vegetarians, and this again is fully adjusted, including BMIs. Lacto-ovo vegetarians were 33% less likely to develop diabetes. Lacto vegetarians, 31% less likely. So they didn't consume. The lacto-vegetarians were consuming milk but no eggs. The lacto-ovo consuming both milk and eggs. They didn't have a vegan population, but semi-vegetarians were 24% less likely to develop diabetes. So what do we know about red meat and diabetes risk? Again, from the Harvard studies, health professional follow-up study and the nurses' health study, almost 150,000 participants adding just half a serving, 1.5 ounces of meat a day increased risk of diabetes by 48%. Unbelievable. So we also have a study, this is another arm of EPIC, not EPIC Oxford, but EPIC Norfolk, and they did a study looking at fruit and vegetable intake and diabetes risk, and what they found was that that basically there was a strong inverse association between fruit and vegetable intake and diabetes incidence. Compared with people eating in the lowest quartile of vegetable intake, risk was reduced 30% for the second quartile, 66% for the third quartile, and 81% for the highest quartile of vegetable intake. So the quarter of the group that were consuming the most vegetables. 81% lower risk. And remember, we learned yesterday that only 2% of men and 3.5% of women actually get even the minimal amounts of fruits and vegetables recommended by the US government. Just unbelievable. This is how much it would help if they improved their intakes. So we also know about treatment using plant-based diets from PCRM. They've had a number of studies comparing low-fat vegan diets to an American Diabetic Association diet for the treatment of diabetes. And those eating vegan diets lost more weight and had greater blood glucose reductions than those eating the American Diabetic Association diets. We also have research from a Czech team that found near-vegan diets more effective than calorie-restricted conventional diets in increasing insulin sensitivity and reducing medications and body fat. So and there are also a lot of books that have been published on using plant-based diets to actually reverse diabetes, or at least improve the risks of complications of diabetes. And the one on the left, Defeating Diabetes, is a book that I wrote back in 2004. And this book was responsible for getting me invited to the Marshall Islands. And that's where we are now, at the Marshall Islands story. So where are the Marshall Islands? Well, you know where Hawaii is, you know where New Zealand is. The Marshall Islands are about 2,300 miles southwest of Hawaii and about 3,500 miles directly north of New Zealand. They are about 5 to 7 degrees north of the equator. And it's really interesting. As you can imagine, it's summer year-round. And it's 82 degrees on average at midnight, at 6 in the morning, in the middle of the day, 100 feet below the surface of the water in the ocean. And the coldest it ever gets is 77 degrees. And the first week I was there, it hit 77 because it was raining outside, and people were shaking. I'm not kidding you, they were just shaking. They were putting coats on. And I have to tell you this story because it's so funny. A doctor in the Marshall Islands, his daughter was going to come to Canada. They were Seventh-day Adventists, and she was going to go to an Adventist college in Alberta. And he said to me, and this is in Lacombe, Alberta. It's like minus 30 there in the wintertime, minus 40. And he said to me, you know, I've heard it's cold in your country. He said, do you think she might need a sweater? I told him to go into the kitchen, enter the refrigerator, stay there for a few hours. That'd help him decide if she needed a sweater. I told him, please, do not send her to Canada. Send her to California. Send her to California. She won't like Canada. But in the Marshall Islands, diabetes is a state of emergency. They have the highest death rates from diabetes on the planet. The estimated prevalence is about 50% in those 35 plus. Pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes, almost all adults, at least 90% of adults have either pre-diabetes or diabetes. About half of all surgeries on the islands are amputations due to diabetes. So was diabetes a problem in the past? Not at all. It was practically unheard of 70 or 80 years ago. The people were slim, they were physically active, and they lived off the land. So what was the traditional diet? Well, they ate plants. 50 to 60% of their calories came from coconut. They ate breadfruit, bananas, they ate pandanus, green leaves, and of course whatever they could catch out of the ocean. Period. That's all they ate. They didn't have anything in a box or a bag. Today, what do they eat? Well, the little girl on the far left is eating breakfast, and I'm not kidding, this was 7 o'clock in the morning. Children eat whatever they want because parents still think that if they have a full belly, they're well nourished. That's the way it was for generations. They didn't understand that any food wouldn't be nourishing. They eat for lunch and dinner white rice, sticky white rice, and meat. It's often Spam or some sort of canned meat or chicken. They eat all the parts of the animals that we don't want, like turkey tails or any cheap animal parts. You can see in the left-hand corner, it's all bins of meat for a celebration, and it's bins of processed meat mostly. The children's favorite snack, oh, and I should say, it's all washed down with luau. The number one ingredient for luau is high fructose corn syrup. The meal on the right is a celebration meal, and so you can see it's white rice, chicken, ham sandwich, a donut, and some white soda biscuits. So that's the food they're living on. The favorite snack of the children is, you know what ramen noodles are? In those crinkly packages, they're deep fried noodles, salted noodles. Well, that's the favorite snack, and what they do is crack open a package. They don't cook it. They pour a bag of, or a package of Kool-Aid powder on top. So all the artificial colors and preservatives, and one day I was watching a kid, they poured their Kool-Aid powder on top, and then they took something out of their pocket, a package of white stuff, and they started sprinkling the white stuff. And I thought, they can't be putting salt. There's 1,800 milligrams of sodium in one of those packages. They can't be putting salt. So I said to the person next to me, I said, what are they putting on their ramen noodles? And they said, oh, that's Ajinomoto. You know what Ajinomoto is? Pure MSG. Yeah. So the top sources of calories in the Marshallese diet are white rice, white bread and rolls, donuts and white flour baked goods, Spam and other canned meat, chicken, ramen noodles with Kool-Aid powder sprinkled on top, sweetened beverages, fish, other meat, salty snacks, and that's about it. It would be difficult for me to design a diet to induce diabetes any better than the diet these people have adopted, and that's why they have such huge diabetes rates, and that's why they have the highest death rates from diabetes on the planet. So in 2006, we began the Diabetes Wellness Project in the Marshall Islands. And the founder of this project was Canvasback Missions, a Seventh-day Adventist medical mission group that had been providing medical teams to the Marshall Islands for 20 years plus, bringing in teams of oncologists, teams of ENT doctors, teams of dentists to try to help the people. And they watched the diabetes epidemic really unfold, and they were determined to do something. So they applied for and were granted a research grant from the U.S. Department of Defense. Why? Because the U.S. government, the Marshall Islands were atomic bomb testing grounds after the Second World War. And so there's some sort of relationship between the Marshall Islands and the United States, and the United States does give a lot back to the Marshall Islands now, and so wanted to do this as another giving back. And the partners were the Marshall Islands Ministry of Health and Loma Linda University, and I was brought on because the doctor that was hired to be the sort of director, the medical director of the project, had just been to a conference that I was speaking at on diabetes. And he said, I think we could use the program from her book as our program to try in the Marshall Islands. So that's how I ended up getting involved. So what we did was we basically did a proper study where we were comparing very aggressive lifestyle intervention with the usual care. And we had 169 participants with A1Cs over 8, so they were diabetic or they were taking diabetes medications. And we used a randomized parallel design with 5 overlapping cohorts, and they were with us for 24 weeks. And what that means, this overlapping design, means before one group has stopped, we're already starting another group. Okay, so we did 5 groups, and we did many others, but only 5 were part of the actual research. Our goal was really simple. Our goal was to reverse the diabetes epidemic. Step 1, to prove that diabetes can be successfully treated with diet and lifestyle in the Marshall Islands. And step 2, to get the government to adopt the program as standard treatment for all Marshallese people. So here's what we did. Weeks 1, 2, 4, and 6, they were with us 4 weekdays for 6 hours a day. Weeks 3, 5, 7, and 8, they were with us twice weekly for about 5 hours. Weeks 9 to 12, they were with us weekly for about 5 hours. And weeks 12 to 24, they were on their own. But they would come for exercise and measure blood sugars and all of that sort of thing. And the guys you see here, all of these men are ministers of health or senators. So we put through the leaders of the communities. We had the president, we had, all of the princes and kings and all of those leaders, because we wanted to educate the leaders. It's quite a society where it's a bit of a nepotistic society. Just say that. and I should also say it's a beautiful society. The people are absolutely incredible. I have never heard people laugh as loud or, sing as beautifully. One story I just have to tell you, this doctor told me this story. He first arrived to the Marshall Islands and he took a side road home to our hotel. And he said the first thing he saw was this gang of teenagers coming towards him, and he got scared. And he said it was a gang of teenage boys. And as they approached and got closer, he realized that they all had their arms around one another and they were all singing. And as they got close to him, they were so friendly and they were saying Yakwe, Yakwe, and which is hello and love and all of that stuff. And he knew he was in a very special place. It's a very special place. So people would do a walk, a blood glucose, and breakfast on their own, but we would provide their food. This is in the intensive phase. They'd come to the clinic for lunch, and then they would be working during the day, and then they would come at 3 and be with us till about 8:15. And in that time, they would do an exercise class, a cooking class. They'd have dinner. They'd have an education session in the evening. It was very intense. And our diet goal was very simple: to restore insulin sensitivity. And to accomplish that task, we must produce weight loss in the overweight participants. We've got to improve blood glucose control. We've got to reduce oxidation and inflammation, and we have to restore their nutritional health because they are, as you can imagine, extraordinarily malnourished. So the diet design, well, it was a plant-based diet high in fiber. It was a very low glycemic load. I have to tell you this before I go on, the high fiber thing. The average fiber intake in the Marshallese people was about 5 grams a day. Okay, we got them to 40 to 50 grams a day. So you can imagine what happened. We had people that, on average, were going to the bathroom once every week or 2. Yeah. And so when they started going to the bathroom every day, it scared them. It scared them. It was just so unusual for them. And so it's really quite interesting. So it was very low glycemic load, minimal refined carbohydrates, if any, minimal ground grains. We didn't use flour products. We used intact whole grains, moderate fat, so we used some nuts and seeds, low saturated fat, 0 trans fatty acids. Most of the saturated fat coconut that we used, and we did use coconut. It's a really important traditional food for them. And sufficient essential fatty acids using flax seeds because they're cheap. We did allow them to eat some fish at home. We'd never served any animal products at the clinic at all, but they were allowed after the first few weeks, if they wanted to have boiled fish, not fried fish, that was permitted because it's a very important part of their cultural diet as well. The diet was anti-inflammatory, high in phytochemicals, high in antioxidants, low in pro-oxidants, contained moderate levels of sodium. A lot of people say, well, and these girls at the bottom, these ladies are our cooks, and they're eating pandanus. And pandanus is a really important source of vitamin A for these people. And pandanus is so fibrous that you can't really eat it. You can only suck the juice out of it. It's like you need to have dental floss if you even go near it. But they love it. It's quite flowery tasting. So why not just return them to their local foods? Well, of course it would be a great idea. You know, it would make sense from a health perspective and from a cultural perspective, but from a practical perspective, it's impossible. Because the island might sustain, like Majuro, the main island that we worked on, might sustain 500 or 1,000 people. There are 30,000 people there. So there's no way. You have to import food. So the answer is to get them to import healthy foods and to eat as many local foods as they can. So it's just so important. So the best choices are cheap imported foods, but healthful ones like beans, legumes, barley, low-cost vegetables like cabbage and squash. So what else did we do in the program? Well, they did daily exercise. Their favorite was dancing, men and women. They loved to dance. So there were and you can see the women, none of them have exercise clothes on because pants in their culture, they're starting a little bit now, but when we arrived, if you wore pants as a woman, you were a prostitute. And it was only people from Asia that would ever wear pants, and they were prostitutes. So women wore long dresses, period, and we had to abide by that, of course, as well. And so they exercised in their long dresses. And if you take nothing away from this for diabetes, if you know of family or friends, walking after meals is one of the most potent things that you can do to keep your blood sugar down. Even if it's only 5 minutes. We had them walking about 20 or 30 minutes after meals. We did cooking classes, we did shopping tours, we did education sessions, and this man right here, Dr. Kamal, was known as the butcher. This is the man that cut the people's legs off, and everybody was scared of him. And he was the sweetest man on the planet. He was a vegetarian himself, and I absolutely loved him. He was just such a dear person, and he said, if only I could convince people to come in before they have gangrene going up their body and I have to cut their legs off to save their lives. But what they would do in their culture, if they got sores on their feet, they would try to treat it with local medicine because they were scared if they went to the doctor, he'd cut their leg off. So they would wait until their leg, everything was black and they had gangrene going in. That's the only thing he could do. So we brought him in to teach people about, how to care for their feet and that he didn't want to cut their legs off. So, and we would teach people about lifestyle and chronic disease, food and nutrition, exercise, stress management, dental health, feet and eye care, and gardening. We tried to help people plant gardens, even if only in buckets, because the soil there, you can imagine, the atoll that they lived on is 30 miles long and 3.7 square miles in area. It's this long strip of coral reef, and there's not good soil there at all. So it's very difficult. So I'll tell you a little bit about the results. In the first 2 weeks, pain in the joints, arms and legs, was reduced or eliminated in almost everybody. Some of these people had intermittent claudication, terrible pain in their legs. It would disappear in the first week. It was unbelievable. They couldn't believe it. They'd be able to sleep through the night. They had increased energy. They, of course, were no longer constipated. They could think more clearly. And 90% of the participants were able to stop taking their medications in the first 2 weeks. It was unbelievable. So, and changes at 2 weeks and 12 weeks, well, you can see fasting blood sugar dropping 71 points in the first 2 weeks, 48 in the first 12, because they were eating foods at home again. A1C dropped about 2 points by 12 weeks. The insulin production went down, which is wonderful because they were hyperinsulinemic. BMIs went down, systolic blood pressure, total cholesterol, and the CRP, the measure of inflammation, went down about 1.2 points. So this was all good. And the committed participants, the ones that really stuck to the program, had the greatest success, many of whom were able to reverse their disease completely. The man on the top right, this is Lorak. His name is Lorak. And he was a pilot. And a lot of people in the Marshall Islands don't get well educated, but he was actually able to become a pilot and fly planes, which was really quite remarkable. He lost his pilot's license because of diabetes. And he came to the program and he completely reversed his disease. He's now flying again. So it was really exciting for him. You know, these people are really pioneers of the Pacific. The participants of this program provided hope amid a very deep sense of hopelessness. They overcame insurmountable mountains of Spam, donuts, ramen noodles, and cola. They put together low-cost, healthful meals despite the high cost and poor quality of their produce and their lack of resources. They don't have money. They managed with little education and marginal English skills. They succeeded with few gyms, one to be exact, no trails, and a cultural taboo against women wearing exercise clothing. The challenge in the Marshall Islands, however, is that even the best education program in the world is not enough because the Marshallese culture is very group-oriented. Everything's shared. There's very few people with independent living units. So community ownership is really key. And until changes are embraced by the entire culture, it's very difficult for people to succeed long term. So what are we doing now? Our funding has run out. So we are there doing what we can, and we've shifted away from research to community efforts. So we gave these little children, this came from PCRM, Carolyn Trapp, came with me for a couple of weeks and handed these Choose Smart Foods, I Choose Smart Foods bracelets to the children. We partnered with the Ministry of Health and the RMI government. This is World Diabetes Day, and the President and the Minister of Health and so forth are all there, and we're educating people. We planted gardens in every single square inch of the hospital grounds. We are teaching the children in the schools and getting them exercising as much as possible. We're educating community groups and church congregations. We've partnered with restaurants and grocery stores, and we're still offering free lifestyle interventions, free exercise classes, and we keep going there every year. In 2014, we went also to Ebi, and Ebi has an area of 0.14 square miles. It's also part of the Marshall Islands. The population is 15,000 people on 0.14 square miles. It's unbelievable. We couldn't do what we could do in Majuro. We had a very small space. We had to use little cooktop stoves, but we did our best. And we taught people to garden. We brought 177 earth boxes so people could garden. And of course, things grow very, very well. We taught people to sprout. We brought the hemp seed sprouting bags from the Sprout Man. We got people walking, we got people dancing, and they had a lot of fun. We did grocery store tours, and here's the results. In our Majuro intervention last year, fasting glucose average drop was 119 points. After exercise, 68 points. And in Ebi, it was the opposite. Average fasting glucose drop was 50, and after exercise, 116 milligrams per deciliter. And people ask me, could this program work at home? And I say, if there is hope in the Marshall Islands, given the enormous barriers they face, what is our excuse? What is our excuse? But the hope rests on demand from those affected and the integration of lifestyle medicine into our healthcare system. It has got to be offered as a treatment option. And so often physicians say to me, oh, but my patients wouldn't do that. And I always say, how do you know if you don't offer it to them? And I quickly want to introduce you to the Vallejo family. The Vallejo family, Andreas right here, was diagnosed with cancer at 36 years of age. And he actually went to Hippocrates. He came to a few conferences, one of which I was speaking at, and he asked me if I could help him to design a diet that would give him the best chance of survival. He had a salivary gland tumor, and it was not good, put it that way. And we put him on a very high raw, very nutrient-dense diet. But what just amazes me is everyone on his family said Andreas, and he is a lawyer in San Francisco, and his favorite pastime was going to the best restaurant in whatever city he was, buying the best steak and the best bottle of wine. He and his wife flew to Paris and spent $3,000 on one meal. So they were really foodies, okay? And his whole family was like that. But what really shocked me is his entire foodie family said, Andreas, whatever diet you're put on, we're doing with you. Just amazing. And his father, Carlos, here's what he was dealing with. Type 2 diabetic, coronary heart disease. He had just had a major heart attack. He had uncontrollable high blood pressure, high cholesterol, peripheral artery disease. His kidneys were failing, and he had recurring gout. He was on 40 units of insulin and 17 pills a day. He was told by his physician that he probably had less than 2 years to live. He never expected that the diet would do anything for him. You know why? Because his doctor told him he had a progressive, irreversible disease and that nothing that he did would change anything. After less than a year on a whole foods plant-based diet, Carlos took 0 insulin and 0 pills. His fasting glucose was 4.4 to 4.8. His A1C 4.9. His blood pressure 115/70s. His arteries opened up based on a PET scan he did without surgical intervention. The scar tissue is disappearing. There is no longer any sign of peripheral artery disease. His kidney function is now perfectly normal, and he has not had a single recurrence of gout since he became vegetarian. After 4 years, his numbers are still the same, and his health continues to improve. Carlos said, I used to spend my days in pain and suffering. I took my insulin, I was dizzy from my pills, and I just knew I was going to die. He said, now I don't even know what to do with all my time. He said, I spend 2 hours a day at the gym. And he said, I feel like I'm 25 years old. He's in his 70s. Yeah. The take-home message, whole foods, plant-based diets reduce risk of type 2 diabetes and provide the most effective therapeutic treatment for people with type 2 diabetes. Plant-based diets also protect against cataracts. Vegans have a 40% reduced risk. Kidney stones, they have a 31% lower risk among lacto-ovo-vegetarians and vegans. Diverticular disease, 31% lower risk. Renal disease, 52% lower risk. Why the advantage? Very simple, because well-planned plant-based diets maximize protective dietary components and minimize pathogenic dietary components. They maximize fiber, phytochemicals, enzymes, antioxidants, anti-inflammatories, plant sterols and stanols, pre and probiotics, and they provide adequate micronutrients and healthy macronutrients. They minimize pathogenic factors, the trans fats, the excessive saturated fats, the refined carbs, the sodium and artificial food additives and new 5GC and chemical contaminants and all the products of high temperature cooking and the TMAO. And when we look at what Americans are eating, 63% of the calories come from processed foods and 25% of the calories come from animal products, only 12% from plant foods. People get it. This is, you've heard of this heart attack grill. Anyone over 350 pounds eats for free all day, every day. They even flaunt it. Here, double bypass burger, triple bypass burger, quadruple bypass burger. He was their mascot until he died at 29. And the bottom line is, if you do not change directions, you may end up where you're headed. And a 5% change in direction will not change anything. You need to make an about face. Lifestyle medicine is one powerful treatment option. Medications and surgeries cannot reverse lifestyle-induced diseases because they do not address the root causes of those diseases. Only profound lifestyle changes have ever proven effective in reversing lifestyle-induced diseases. And the bottom line is, the more we change, the more we heal. And I would like to make a call to action, because it is time for food and nutrition policies to become a national priority. And it is time that governments recognize that policies that make healthy choices easier for people bring significant health, economic, social, ecological, and ethical advantages. And with that, I will close and say thank you so very much for your attention. And I'm promoting my books, which have all of this information in them. But thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.